All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for traveling here to Cincinnati to be with us and take part in our first go at the Herche lecture. And we have two excellent lecturers today, David Okonkwo and Alex Thomas. David is a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Pittsburgh, where he's also the director of spinal deformity and the director of neurotrauma. It's hard to know where to start and end with David. He's a true innovator who's consistently embraced new technology throughout his career and expanded the applications of these technologies from the early days of lateral approaches and navigation to robotics and validating sagittal balance parameters. He's kind of been through it all. And he possesses a rare set of skills that allow him to rapidly adopt these new technologies and safely incorporate them into practice. He's a technically gifted surgeon and probably the only surgeon I know whose blood pressure paradoxically drops in stressful situations, as I discovered throughout my 7 years in Pittsburgh. He's the kind of surgeon who is very thoughtful and calculated, but also capable of making decisions on the fly, and oftentimes has a knack for making the difficult look very easy and for distilling down very complex problems into simple ones. I had the fortune of spending, I joke that I spent 7 years in Pittsburgh, but I probably spent 6.5 years directly under David's auspices there, and Adam Cantor as well. So I had essentially a 6.5-year spine residency with Dr. Okonkwo, affectionately known as Conk, to those of us who know him well. David completed his MD PhD at Virginia Commonwealth University, and then his residency and fellowship at UVA, working with Chris Shaffrey and others. So without further ado, I will bring David up here and prepare him to give an excellent talk.
Okay. Because no one's telling me what to do, I get to take liberties with this special moment. And so what I've decided to do is actually pull this in from a different perspective, because I wear a different hat in life beyond being a surgeon, a physician, first a physician, second a surgeon, and third a researcher. But I also spend a portion of my time doing venture capital. And we have an in-house venture capital firm at UPMC called UPMC Enterprises. And so I'm going to launch this from the perspective of what the people who are writing the checks and putting capital at risk to try to change medicine, what they're thinking about, what those pressures are right now, and then dovetail that into how all of us are deeply, deeply tied to medtech. And it's incredible what's happened in neurosurgery. It's unbelievably beautiful what's happened to neurosurgery. That innovation and medtech are now, you can't even make a distinction between medtech and medicine, because we can't do what we do without medical devices. And so it's a real honor for me to be asked to be the first Herche lecturer in surgical innovation, because I try to live this every day of my life. But what I really watch is the impact that this has on real people with real problems with our patients. So I do receive royalties for medical devices sold. I have a whole parallel life where I am a traumatic brain injury researcher. I have zero conflicts in the world of traumatic brain injury. So when I am trying to change the practice of medicine for people with brain injuries, it's out of my deep, abiding love for that patient population. And it's because it's funded by the US taxpayer. And I don't think that I should take public dollars from the NIH and DOD and convert that into personal profit for myself. But on the spine side, I'm trying to be as massively conflicted as I can possibly get. And I've been modestly successful in that pursuit, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. So I'm gonna talk about the medical device market, but I'm going to talk about it through the lens of the venture capitalists. And then we'll talk about some innovations that have occurred. And then I'll finish up by showing how we can apply all of these amazing technologies to our patients to deliver better outcomes. Our in-house venture capital firm at UPMC is called UPMC Enterprises. It began on a much smaller scale where the idea was, could we fund the thoughts and ideas of University of Pittsburgh scientists and engineers or UPMC physicians to catalyze them towards something that would make its way into the commercial space. But the entire picture of UPMC Enterprises changed when in January 2020, we became $1 billion fund because the board of UPMC gave us $800 million more in cash to go spend. And then we brought in Jean Cunicelli, whose picture is here, and she came from Bay Capital in San Francisco, a hardcore veteran venture capitalist who chose to come to Pittsburgh and lead this effort. And it is radically changed the landscape on a number of levels. Our portfolio, our portfolio of companies keeps getting bigger. Some of these are things that people may recognize. And if you don't know what a bridge is, for example, you should. And a bridge is an AI-based company that basically takes the ambient noise of a clinic visit and turns it into the documentation that you need in your electronic medical record so that you don't have to write a clinic note. And we want technology to help remove some of the torture of what it is that we do every day, and a bridge is an example of that. The medical device industry, though, is insane. Okay, 581 billion in global revenue in 2023. It's enormous in the United States. The actual growth projections keep changing higher. So if you look at what the projections were 10 years ago about growth in medical devices, the projections were 3 to 4% growth. But as the time goes on, the expectations of growth grow higher. And so now the projections are over 6% of annual growth in the coming decade. And then this is delivering enormous value in the public markets to shareholders of publicly traded med tech companies. But what it's also doing is empowering a massive landscape of people with great ideas being put in positions to receive capital to bring those ideas to life, to then go compete to see if they can do something better. And we have a bizarrely more favorable environment at the federal level where the FDA has actually decided to meet this challenge. It's not perfect yet, but it actually is easier to work with the FDA towards getting things delivered into the marketplace than it has been historically. And as an example, there were 166 breakthrough device designations that were given in 2022, and that number is, dwarfs what that was 5-10 years ago. The development space for medtech is as healthy as it's ever been, but it's changing, and it's changing in very specific ways. And we have multiple examples of medical device companies in this room and supporting this weekend, and they come from different perspectives. Medtronic is a behemoth that covers a whole range of things. Globus, with its acquisition of NuVasive, is very, very, very specific to the musculoskeletal space. Carlsmed is trying to fill a niche that says, look, you can create patient-specific implants that will make your job easier and the outcomes better for patients, but it's at a radically different scale from what Medtronic is doing, and the way those companies grow are also different. But what's happening, and I'll show this with a little bit of data, what's happening is that there's organic growth and inorganic growth. Do you know the difference between those two things, Dr. McCarthy? Yeah, okay. So organic growth would be a med tech company pulls together engineers, pulls together a design team and says, we're going to go solve a problem, and you grow from within. Inorganic growth would be that same company saying, we know that we want this, so we're just going to go buy it. And the inorganic growth is going to be a bigger and bigger part of things going forward. And I'll try to highlight why that is with data. But we now have more and more and more med tech companies whose market caps are over $10 billion, which means that when they execute well, they have cash on hand to do inorganic growth. And it's cheaper to make that acquisition further upstream, especially over the last 4 years, if you understand the private equity markets and venture capital, where we have become the 800-pound gorillas, and we are telling you, the innovator, what your company or your idea is worth. It used to be that you would go out and you would sell it, and this was the tech bubble of the 90s. Like, look at us, we're going to create something that's going to be worth billions and billions of dollars. And there are even these like classic scenes in movies where they're saying like, we don't actually want revenue. If we get revenue, then we're going to be hampered as a company. So once we get revenue, then we're going to be judged on revenue. We don't want revenue. We just want big ideas that people will then value for themselves. Well, that's not how it's working now. We're telling you, and the number we give you is often a fraction of what you think you're worth, but it's still way ahead of nothing, like way ahead of nothing. But what we need in the venture capital space is we need to understand what your exit strategy is. And we need to know who the short list of people who are likely to grow inorganically by purchasing your med tech idea. And the faster we can get your idea to a place that an acquirer wants, the more everybody wins. And the larger your return on investment, the larger your internal rate of return and your larger multiple on invested capital. So we now have more and more heavy hitters in the med tech space who have cash to do inorganic growth. But you still need the venture capital to birth these ideas. And it is insane the amount of money that is available for investment. And it just keeps getting more and more and more. But one of the things that's very, very interesting is that historically, your time to cash out was very long. So average 8.8, median 8.2 years from formation to exit for a med tech company. Less than 25% of these acquisitions would occur within 6 years of company inception. And then we always had to hold on to what's called dry powder, where you make a $5 million investment in this company, but you have to hold back $3 or $4 million in your fund because you're going to have to reinvest in this company to get it to where it needs to be. And so all of that creates time. Time reduces returns. Returns are how venture capital firms are judged. So what venture capital is keenly interested in is finding the ideas that are going to get to an inflection point and an event, as we call it, a merger, an acquisition, or an IPO, faster and faster. And if you look carefully at the data, we're gaining exits earlier and earlier in that investment stream. And what we're seeing is that the companies that take longer and longer and longer to get to where they're going are actually delivering diminishing returns. And so the IPO market is terrible in the grand scheme of things for med tech. And what's vastly, vastly superior is to have an idea that's great enough that one of the big guns want your idea and your technology faster. And it's how everybody wins. And one of the reasons why this is getting faster is because of the digital revolution. And so you can digitally innovate faster than you can engineering innovate. And we're starting to see this huge upswing in these fascinating products, which are the marriage of a digital solution, often machine learning or AI based, with a tangible product, because it is getting us there faster to something that's going to make a difference and differentiate from what's in the marketplace. So what does this have to do with spine surgery? A back issue is the third most common reason to seek medical attention in the United States. If you look at ER visits, things that are spine related are consistently present in what brings people to the emergency room. It's not lost on any of us that spinal disorders are a major, major, major health issue, and a voluminous health issue in the United States and beyond. And the spinal device market has changed enormously in a very short period of time. So this is 2019, and there's DePuy Synthes at 18% market share, Medtronic at 28%, a bunch of people there was like the big six down to Zimmer Biomet at 7%, and then, all of these much, much, much smaller players. But consolidation, Orthofix, C-Spine, Globus, NuVasive, and it's now much, much different within 4 years. Medtronic has contracted in its market share. Globus is now virtually neck and neck with Medtronic with a faster growth rate. DePuy is figuring out what it is. Johnson & Johnson, like from the outside looking in, I don't feel like they have clarity about what they want out of their spine division. Stryker is a fascinating company with this huge footprint, but hasn't fully figured out how to integrate across its verticals. You can't walk 10 feet in a hospital without passing a Stryker product. But you would never perceive that relationship and cross-pollination between all the Stryker products that are consumed in a hospital with one another. It's such a bizarre thing. And then, the Alphatechs of the world are trying as hard as they possibly can to break through that barrier, and the Orthofixes of the world are trying as hard as they can to break through that barrier to get north. And then you have, Zimmer Biomet, which used to be one of the big six, spins off its spine division, flounders, and then it gets bought by private equity. And it's now High Ridge, owned by a company called HIG Capital, which is a 60 billion private equity firm. When you look at growth, Medtronic can't grow organically. It's just not going to happen. The product portfolio is too mature. And so Medtronic, as a key example, will grow inorganically. So anyone who has the brilliant idea of what's next, of how to innovate and how to change the practice of medicine in the world of spine, you have companies with massive, massive market capitalizations and who have every resource that they need at their disposal to make an acquisition, who are hungry and looking for the next great idea. And there are a lot of really, really, really great ideas. So the market exists, the opportunity is there, and where are these advances coming from? If you want to make a difference, you actually have to understand the disease state that you're taking care of. And Zach hinted at this, but one of the major revolutions in spine care over the last 15 years is the understanding of posture and spinal balance and all of these spinal parameters, and being cognizant of these spinal parameters as you evaluate the patient in front of you and what's necessary in order to achieve the desired result. And this was one of the first things that Adam Cantor and I did 10 years ago now, where SurgiMap was building this desktop-based system, and NuVasive was creating a relationship with them, and they're like, hey, you guys got to check this out. And I'm in San Diego, and I got this little preview of it, and then I just have this with a literally a tube-based monitor. It's like, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Who is going to sit at a desk with some giant monstrosity of a CPU and a monitor to work through this? It's ridiculous. So we came home, and the folks were coming to visit us in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, we found a 19-year-old kid who wrote the code to build an app that let you snap a picture of an X-ray on the screen, manipulate a couple of things, and give you every single spinal pelvic parameter that you needed. And then we had the two people that ran NuVasive at the time, Pat Miles and Alex Lukianoff, came to Pittsburgh. We're on the 62nd floor of the U.S. Steel Tower, because the U.S. Steel Tower is now owned by UPMC and are occupied by UPMC. And I sat there and I said to these guys, look, you can have an app on your phone, you can snap a picture, and then if you hit it right, that will dovetail directly into an understanding of what the best intervention for that patient is. And then beyond that, you will know 6 weeks in advance exactly what implants you need for that day's case 6 weeks in advance. You will actually understand the bill of materials necessary to support the case. And that if you do that, do you know that Medtronic has $2 billion of inventory in the trunks of its reps on any given day? Okay. The SG&A costs, which are the costs of the business to run in order to support what we do, all the people on the sales side, every machination that you have to go through so that when you ask for the 12 millimeter cage, you actually get a 12 millimeter cage. There's a massive amount of work that goes from the manufacturing of that cage to it actually showing up in your operating room. And the cost of that eats up more than anything else that eats up a cost that drags on revenue towards profit for the med tech companies. And so if you could just hand them the 4 things they're going to need that day for the surgeon, you can drop your SG&A costs by 30%. Your profit would go sky high. And they looked at me and said, we're not ready for that. Like, as a company, it's impossible for us to pivot to what you're describing. But it did translate into this whole IGA platform of trying to start to deliver to surgeons, tools in order to think through and plan and then get it right. But NuVasive never executed on that vision, and I didn't have the time, nor was I an AI ML expert, which I'm still not, but I wish I were. We didn't get it right. And we tried a bunch of different rabbit holes. We didn't get it right. But there was a group of French people that did. And they created a company called Metacrea. And then they had to think about how to monetize. The value of Metacrea is in the planning software and the delivering of a patient-specific rod. But why would they give you a patient-specific rod when you're really just trying to get all the data and all the education of that patient of what's the best thing to do for that patient when you take that patient to the operating room? They had to monetize it somehow because we only know how to calculate things against revenue. So they had to create a rod that they could sell. When Medtronic, which I think it was $175 million, I can't remember the exact price, but when Medtronic bought Metacrea, they were buying the software. But you can't monetize software particularly well. Like, try that if you're on the sales side. Try showing up to a hospital and saying, I want to sell you a service agreement for this software. They're like, what? Doesn't work. I have a rod that's going to make your intervention more successful. Let's think about that. And then you can find a price point for that. So Metacrea was brilliant in figuring out that they could monetize their software through a rod. But Medtronic can make rods any day of the week. They didn't buy the rod, they bought the software. Metacrea got it right. We had a grand vision, but we didn't get it right. Okay. Alex is going to talk about, how to leverage these different approaches to the spine. Dr. Kruger is going to talk about AI stuff coming through. But, we have all these amazing tools at our disposal to revolutionize what we're doing. But this whole lateral approach was clearly something interesting. And so this is the first patent that Adam and I ever got. And we're doing an XLIF in 2009, and he and I were looking at each other and we're saying, there is a much easier way of doing this. And we didn't go to a garage, but we went up to Adam's office and we took out the garage is a great route to go. And we took out a yellow legal pad and we sketched out, and it's amazing how eerily similar the very first sketch that we produced of this idea of a novel retractor, how eerily similar that very first sketch was to the ultimate final product. We started shipping this around to the big guys, and this was 2009. And so they basically looked at us and said, we have no idea who you are. You know, flee, like, please, like, go. So then we found a small company in Colorado called Lynx, and we brought to life this Timberline retractor with Lynx. We did it in a year, from soup to nuts in 1 year. We took it from a yellow legal pad piece of paper to an FDA approved retractor. We learned a bunch of lessons. We got sued by Nuvasive because we delivered a monitoring system alongside this with a company called Cadwell. And we use a hunting algorithm, and Nuvasive's Maxis retractor and the M5 monitoring system is all based off of a hunting algorithm. And they had filed IP over the hunting algorithm, and so they sued us. And that was another set of lessons to be learned, that I was not in a capacity to combat a company that had, best I could tell, bottomless resources on the legal side. So we gave up on the monitoring side of things. And because we were working with a company as small as Lynx, we just didn't have the resources to combat it. But Lynx gets bought by Biomet, gets bought by Zimmer, and now our retractor is part of the Big Six. But sadly, we got bought by Zimmer, and Zimmer struggles to execute. And so we had a product, a device that was doing double-digit quarter-over-quarter growth until the acquisition by Zimmer. And then following the acquisition of Zimmer, we had double-digit quarter-over-quarter losses, declines in revenue.
Not enough cages.
Not enough cages, not enough execution. And then eventually Zimmer Biomet offloads its spine division, and then, you know, it's 9 more years later, and now you have HIG Capital trying to resurrect what really is a strong spine portfolio. And I think the most haptically and ergonomically pleasing retractor on the market, in my humble opinion. But really, yeah, started on a yellow legal pad, sheet of paper, in Adam Cantor's office in 2009. The retractor is gorgeous, and it's perfect. And you can you dial in exactly what you want the aperture to look like in all dimensions. It is a truly, the engineers with whom we worked, and Alan Burkholder was probably the most gifted of those engineers. It is a gorgeous retractor, and it's another lesson in med tech that it wasn't seated in the correct home of a company that could execute on its greatness. And so we never achieved the highest heights of this retractor because we never had the right industry partner to get it to where it could go. But that means a lot to me to hear you say that, Bill. I use Maxis from Nuvasive because, for a lot of reasons. One is that we kept telling them we don't have the right instruments. We don't have the right instruments. And so really what I should use is the Timberline retractor and the Nuvasive instruments is really what I should use. But then just the way the monitoring is you have to have the right external group of neurophysiologists and neurophys techs in order to use this retractor, because we couldn't deliver it to market married to a monitoring system for EMG because NuVasive sued us. They probably didn't have a leg to stand on, actually, but I didn't have the money to go fight them. And then the time cost of that, you know, we would still be in court, actually. We would still be litigating this if we had stood up to it. But there was just a strategic decision made by Lanks that this makes no sense for us to fight this. And then Biomet never took it up. And then Zimmer was challenged in the spine division to the point that Zimmer appropriately divorced itself from spine. Yeah. Yeah. It's a nice little retractor.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It seemed that the other day. If you have an idea and you're just looking for the nut, and it doesn't matter who buys it, but if you're looking for the royalties, then you need the right partner to execute the strategy.
Yeah, all of the above. But in the end, like, yes, look, profit motives are gorgeous. You know, capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty and solved more disease and hunger than any market system in the history of the world. Capitalism is a gorgeous, magnificent, beautiful thing. Okay. And the more you win, it usually means the more you're delivering a positive effect on whatever your constituency is. Okay. Whether it's factories or whether it's people. And what I want, you know, our goal, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that look, the greatest feeling in the world is to help somebody. That when you get, you know, we just saw a video of an incredibly grateful patient who then, you know, gave back, which is how we all can be here today. There's no feeling in the world that I have ever come across that is better than that moment when you get the gratitude from the patient, or you get the Christmas card that says, thank you for what you did for our mother, or the letter that says, our father is a part of our family again because you saved his life. I mean, there's no feeling in the world that's better than that. You do it one person at a time. When you start to innovate, you influence hundreds of patients at a time. When you stroke the checks that provide the capital for the next great idea, you influence thousands of people at a time. Okay. So the greatest feeling in the world is the one at a time. I have no intention of walking away from being a surgeon and moving into something like a chief medical officer or something like that, because the last thing that I want is to be separated from what we can do for the person, the one person in front of you, to make a difference for that one person and their family. Once you start figuring out better ways of doing things, you want them to win. Okay. And however you define win, but I want the win that I want as many surgeons as possible using this, not to pay for my kids' college education, but because I genuinely believe that this is a better way of doing lateral access surgery than its competitors. Yeah. But then you got to get it to heal. And it's got to fuse in order for all of this to make a difference. And you need immediate stabilization because mobile segments don't fuse. You want osseous integration, which is why PEEK is a flawed material. There is no such thing as osseous integration with PEEK. You want bony arthrodesis, and then you don't want your implants to fail. So you have to achieve fusion, and the faster you achieve osseous integration, the better. The old school solid titanium implants are disappearing from the landscape because solid titanium doesn't integrate, doesn't have osseous integration. PEEK doesn't have osseous integration. Porous PEEK, which theoretically gives you the illusion of osseous integration, but it's not actually osseous integration. And if you've ever taken out a PEEK cage in a revision case, you know this. Like, you just have to get there, and then the PEEK cage is going to come out. Have you ever taken out a 3D printed porous titanium cage in a revision? It's astonishing. Were you going to say something?
Well,
most recent one I did is less than a year, so I don't know.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. I've never taken, that's not true. I had a migrated cage that I have taken out. But the fascinating thing is that you can engineer inert materials to have biologic properties. You can induce biologic behavior from metal. And this happens at the macro scale with osseous integration. It happens at the micro scale where cells are actually drawn into the cage. And it happens at the nanoscale with the influence of integrins and protein behavior. These 3D printed porous titanium cages are actually alive. They are inert materials so beautifully and magnificently designed that they induce biologic behavior. And of all the families that are FDA approved, the families of 3D printed porous titanium spinal implants, there actually is one family on the market that is FDA cleared to market themselves with nano behavior. They have delivered the data to the FDA that demonstrates that their 3D printed porous titanium cage changes the behavior of proteins in ways that promote healing. And so they are actually cleared by the FDA to market for the nano properties of their implants. These things are insane. And they're obviously better. And so what's happened is in a very short period of time, we got the first 3D printed porous titanium implants across the finish line at the FDA with NuVasive in 2019. Okay. Sarah, what percentage of XLIF cages today are PEEK versus titanium? Yeah. Like it was overnight. It happened immediately. Because as soon as you understand what these things do, like the concept of putting a PEEK cage in a human being left my brain the second time I touched one of these things. You would never, ever, 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 ever put a PEEK cage into someone you cared about. Yes, sir.
But ACDF is a good example.
Of what?
There's still a lot of people because they don't want to look at X-rays that are imperfect.
Yeah.
I'll see what I think.
So say that one more time. They don't want to look at X-rays.
He's so forgiving on the X-ray.
Yeah.
But I've used sort of my whole career. But in every place I've been, in Phoenix and even here, there's more PEEK than titanium in that.
Yeah.
And I truly think it's a class because patients say, why is it?
And what's so wild is that the modulus is the modulus is the modulus. One molecule of titanium is the same modulus as 5 tons of titanium, right? The same thing for PEEK. So the modulus of elasticity properties of these implants, you can't win the argument of PEEK versus titanium based off of the modulus of elasticity of one molecule of each of those substances. However, the stiffness and the behavior of the titanium implant is actually superior, which is ironic. So the subsidence rates are lower with 3D printed porous titanium than they are with PEEK. The cervical spine is a really special and fascinating place. And we'll talk about this tomorrow when I talk about spine injuries in the elite athlete, because you have to make real fundamental choices about what surgery you're going to do in the athlete, and you're going to be judged radically differently than when you take care of the 45-year-old accountant. Okay. But it is really difficult to screw up an ACDF. It's not impossible. We watch it happen all the time. The operation is so gloriously fantastic. And it's another manifestation of that Everett Rogers innovation life cycle curve that Dr. Tobler showed earlier. You know, when Ralph Cloward introduced the ACDF, he was nearly driven out of neurosurgery. He was called insane. And he was targeted by his peers at the time for having the audacity to propose such an outrageous operation, which is the operation that, in my experience, carries with it the highest patient satisfaction rate of anything we do in neurosurgery. I don't know what your experience is, but that operation is glorious. When you apply that operation to the correct patient, the outcomes are astounding and the failure rates are so low. Therefore, you can overcome the inherent weaknesses of peak because that operation is so wonderful and so destined to heal. And the stable pseudoarthrosis is virtually meaningless in the ACDF. The stable pseudoarthrosis in the lumbar spine is going to bite you eventually. So do I have a problem with people using peak? I don't have a problem. Like, the best way to do something is the way you do it best. If that is the best thing for you and your hands for your practice, fantastic. But if you're starting out in this game and you're crafting where your life is going to go, we're going to come up with something better than what's available right now. But I'm telling you right now, like, I cannot conceive of a moment that I would choose peak over 3D printed porous titanium.
Yeah. Get a very stable sort of price. Or how about a T-lift cage too? Trying to maneuver that into the to the space without ruining it.
Yeah, so I'm obviously biased in this because I helped design the a portion of the modulus family. Okay, so I'll respond to you backwards. When we did the T-lift A, the modulus T-lift A cage, we didn't get it right until we got the inserter right. And the thing that I am most proud of from that design team is the inserter. And the engineer was Kevin Chen, and it was amazing. And we got it right. You're in control of the cage to put it right where you want it. It pivots, you drop it down. It doesn't work though if you haven't done the correct disc prep. And if you don't address the saddle laterally to convert the saddle laterally into a box, you won't get the cage to sit precisely. You know, so many of these things, it's not the implant's fault.
The T-lift is the
Yes. Yeah. And Chris Schaffer used to take people on these, he called them pilgrimages, to go watch Jürgen Harms operate in Heidelberg. And I was fortunate enough to go on one of those pilgrimages. And watching Jürgen Harms, I watched him do a T-lift, and it was incredible. He's the father of the T-lift. And it was transformational for me because I realized this guy is just better. And the way he's doing this is what delivers the superior performance of, and then, you know, and he would, like, he got 99% of the disc out. It was crazy. And then he would shape the space perfectly. And then he would take his Harms cages, you know, he'd have the tubular cage with that wire mesh. And then he would take the little wire cutters and he would cut it once. He would look in the space, he would take that tube, he would cut it once, and he would slide it in and then move on. And it was perfect. It was insane. But it was the technical performance. It wasn't the implant. It was the technical performance of the surgeon. Yeah. All right. So we'll finish up with the application of this to real people with real problems. And it was incredible to go to work every day for 20 plus years with my best friend. And we trained together in Charlottesville. He came to Pittsburgh when I got to Pittsburgh, and I was like, dude, you're not gonna believe this. This is a great job. And we worked together every day for over 20 years. And then he chose to go move to the beach in Newport, and he's so outrageously happy, and I'm so happy for him and his family. But we were a part of a movement that helped to change the practice of medicine. And there was another dude who was right there the whole time. And he was a trainee, but he walked this journey with us. And Zach was actually a huge part of the execution of what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. And he made it very clear very early that he wanted to be a spine surgeon, and remained committed to that future. And we had a great run. He was not the model prisoner. But he did successfully complete his incarceration. Yes, exactly. Your words, Zach, not mine. I didn't view you as a prisoner. It felt voluntary to me. Yeah. But in 2008, I had this idea that we could fix scoliosis through tiny and little incisions that it didn't require for everybody these great big whacks. And it turns out that we were right, but we didn't have the right technology. And I am so grateful for those patients in those early days, because I had to sit with them and explain to them, I have a vision, I have an idea, and I don't know if I'm right. And if I'm right, I think we can help you in a major way. And if I'm wrong, you're going to end up with a second operation. We won't have lost anything, but we'll have to do more surgery. I could just do one surgery the traditional way, but I think that there's a better way of doing this, but you may end up with two surgeries instead of one. And they were up for it. They wanted to be a part of the change of the practice of medicine. And there were many of them where it worked, but there was a whole host of them where it wasn't durable, and we had to do more surgery, or it was obvious at the start that we hadn't fixed the problem, and we had to do the second surgery within 6 to 12 weeks. But there are a couple things that happened that have radically changed the complexity of the case that we can achieve with MIS techniques. And the real big first one was anterior column realignment, or ACR, where whether you do it anteriorly, which virtually every ALIF is an ACR, if you think about it, whether you do it anteriorly or whether you do it laterally, if you section the anterior longitudinal ligament, unless there's truly fused facets in back, you can meaningfully change someone's spinal parameters in the sagittal plane, with very, very, very little blood loss compared to a pedicle subtraction osteotomy or even a traditional open approach with Smith-Peterson osteotomies. And so this really changed how many patients were eligible for MIS surgery. So here's a 59-year-old lady who's out of whack from her spinal parameters. You know, this would not be something that we would have typically tackled when you think of how far forward her head is over her pelvis. But with ACR, you can pull it off. And I'm a huge consumer of technology. I love it. Our plan in this case was to do one ACR laterally, one ACR anteriorly with a couple more L-lifts, and then back it up posteriorly with percutaneous instrumentation. You can see this is before 2019 because it's peak cages, but just through the lateral and anterior approach, we've already radically improved her sagittal balance. And now we're just going to come back and lock it in posteriorly. So there's our intraoperative CT scanner in Pittsburgh. And oops. That's the spine mask. Don't use that anymore. But it was brilliant an idea. But why do I consume all of this technology? Because I hate radiation and I hate lead. And this is actually a real problem. And I feel for our endovascular colleagues. Like, these guys glow. And it's remarkable what the occupational exposure is of an endovascular neurosurgeon. But a spine-focused neurosurgeon doing 400 cases a year will incur a radiation exposure of 60,000, almost 61,000 millirems to their hands, 34,000 to their eyes over a 30-year career. Like, we were doing an XLIF a couple days ago, and the guy's like holding our fellow was holding the K-wire with his hand in the thing. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, if you're going to do that every case of your career, you're going to end up with leukemia. It's crazy. So I hate radiation, and navigation can improve our accuracy. But more importantly, from my perspective, it can reduce our radiation exposure, and then it can reduce revisions and takes backs. So I navigate as much as I can. And then we have, extra technologies so we can create rods on site. We'll learn more about how to have rods delivered to you. But you can create rods on site and dial in and change from where the spine is to where you want it to be. So I love that stuff. And so we can pull this off with no radiation exposure to the staff or the surgeon. Now, the patient gets a CT scan, but if you understand, not a one slice CT scanner, but a 128 slice modern helical CT scanner, the radiation exposure of a modern CT scan is actually tiny. It's way less than fluoro. The patient gets less radiation, the staff gets basically no radiation, and our accuracy goes up. So that's awesome. But when you don't have the right interbodies, you fail. And so we've talked about how this advanced material properties has radically changed things. And so when the Modulus family came out in 2019 for alpha launch, it came out for full commercial launch in 2020, but it was alpha launched in 2019. And we got our hands on this, and we were part of getting it over the finish line at the FDA. It's like, okay, now this is hot stuff, man. Now we're cooking with gas. Like, now we're getting to places where the subsidence rates are down, the success rates are going up. This is a beautiful, gorgeous thing. But then here's the crazy thing. And this used to drive Adam nuts, because all the patients would come through my clinic, and then when we would do these MIS cases, Adam and I would do them together, and he's such a slick wizard with lateral approaches. But these patients would know me for 6-9 months, and then they would meet Adam at the last clinic visit before the surgery. And so I would introduce them, and we would go over the plan, and Adam and I had a deal that we both had to agree that this patient was appropriate for minimally invasive scoliosis surgery. If we didn't have agreement, then it would be a good old-fashioned open approach. And we pretty much almost always had an agreement. But then what I started to tell the patients after Adam would leave the room, I would say, listen, you can't tell Dr. Cantor, but I'm not going to put screws in you. And this would drive Adam nuts, because he didn't believe that it would work to just put the interbodies in without backing it up posteriorly. And I would say to the patients, like, there's no reason for us to do 2 operations on you within a few days of one another. If you need the screws, we'll do it 6-12 weeks later. And this would drive Adam nuts, because he'd be like, we're putting screws in, right? I'm like, oh yeah, dude. Yeah, we got a plan. And then the day after the lateral and anterior, the patients would be so happy. They'd already be like, I can already tell what you've done for me. And so I would say to them, like, do you feel like I need to do more surgery on you? And they would say, no. Why do I need more surgery when I can already tell one day after surgery how much better I feel? And so I would discharge them and then say, we'll revisit this. And then what we discovered was that virtually nobody got the screws, virtually nobody. And this was a hard thing. It was a hard thing for Adam. I was being lambasted in the ISSG amongst my colleagues who told me I was insane for going after scoliosis patients with multi-level X lifts and A lifts without backing them up posteriorly. But the gorgeous thing about the ISSG is all of our data goes in, and then it's independent statisticians who run all the analyses. And then my colleagues started to see the data come back and realize, like, holy cow, like, it works. And then I started to have one and then two and then three other colleagues putting data into the ISSG database. So we then started to discover in a multi-center fashion that if you pick the right patient and you have the right technology, you don't need screws. And so when I'm asked about the complication rates of staged surgery, I get to highlight how I have dramatically reduced the complication rates of staged surgery by no longer doing the second stage. And it's a beautiful, gorgeous thing.
What's the right patient?
The right patient is so if you're doing ACRs, it doesn't work. Okay. So,
Too much laxing.
yeah. So if you're doing ACRs, not an A-lift, but a lateral ACR, if you're doing lateral ACRs, you need to back them up. Yeah. You have to look at the facets, because if the facets are fused posteriorly, you're not going to get what you're not going to, and you can't induce the correction that you need. Then you have to do osteotomies to free that up, in order to get the correction that you need. It's hard for me to articulate like the specific subset. Well, that stuff's easy for me because I don't operate on anybody with a BMI over 32. I don't operate on smokers. I don't operate on anybody with a hemoglobin A1C over 7.2, and on and on and on. Like, you have to have
He
it.
doesn't need too many surgeries.
7, I'm at 36. I'm gonna go to 32 now.
Hey, man, I talk to everybody and I tell them, like, I'm doing this for you, not for me, and I'll walk the journey with you. And my team works with them, and it's amazing. You know what else? It does is it screens out the people who are their own worst enemies, right? So when that patient is like, holy cow, my life is miserable. My life has been overtaken by this disease. And if I work with you to get to this point, you're telling me that there's a way for me to have a better quality of life. And when that person quits smoking, loses 50 pounds, changes their diet, gets their hemoglobin A1C down, it's getting easier now with Ozempic and Wegovy and everything. And then 8 months later, they're showing up and they've checked every box that you put in front of them. The likelihood of success is sky high. And the person, right? And then there's it just happened the other day where the patient was coming back and they're like, I feel great. Like, mission accomplished, right? But the person who's hassling you about all of those expectations, when you're articulating to them the relationship between complication rates and those check boxes. So there's a great guy in Cincinnati. And no, but what I do say to them is, I'm not so sure that I'm the right doctor for you. I don't tell them I'm not the right surgeon. I tell them I'm not the right doctor for you. Because there's something about this doctor-patient relationship where we're not aligning. So I'm not the right doctor for you. And then it's incredible how often those people then come back 3-4 months later and they've processed it, or they've gone and gotten a second opinion and realized, like, I'm not feeling the same oomph from this other practice that I got from your practice. We had a good run in Pittsburgh with Zach. We're so proud of what Zach is doing with his career. I talk about you so often because I think that you made such a brilliant choice for yourself and your family with the employment decision that you made, which was, and if you know Zach, he freaking machinates over everything. So, you know, this was countless hours of couch therapy of my life listening to Zach go through the process of job selection. But I think that the absence of equity is an existential threat to medicine. And so I applaud the Mayfields of the world that have stuck to their guns about what is best for the surgeons in order for them to do what's best for patients. This is a grand place that has executed in spades for over, you know, for decades and decades and decades. This is a special place, and we're really, really proud of you, Zach. I'm proud that I was able to give you inspiration inside the operating room. Adam is proud that he was able to give you inspiration outside of the operating room. And but Zach is a unicorn and a unique human being. It's not perfectly clear to us how he's gotten away with all of this for as long as he has, but it's endearing and it's charming, and it is bend over, laugh out loud, stomach hurting joy to spend time around Zach. And so I'm grateful to you and to Dr. Tobler and for the entire Mayfield crew for the invitation. I appreciate your time. Thank you.